Hiya. It's John Peers again for the final time on this first series of my podcasts, talking about my experiences whilst I've been solo motorcycle riding through Europe and Asia. Now, most of my stories have got nothing to do with motorbike as such, but they do because they have only happened because I've been in these places. If I hadn't been on a motorbike, I wouldn't have been in the middle of the countryside in Moldova. I'd be in a city centre. If I had gone into the countryside, guess what? I would have had to have gone on an organised tour or something. So the freedom of a motorbike or a car, well, you can do it all in a car, of course you can. The freedom of travel is exactly that, isn't it? That you can be anywhere. And I've avoided city centres. I'm not really interested in city centres, especially capital cities. Smaller cities and towns and villages are my big thing. So today I'm going to talk to you about 3 or 4, well, you're going to call them coincidences, but I'm going to say that they happened because of circumstances which were pushed through. You sort of followed a story and it led somewhere, and that's why it happened. Okay, so the first one involves a plane. I'm sitting on a plane. It was actually a Czech Airlines plane out of Birmingham. And I was going over to visit my then girlfriend, who is now my wife, and I happened to be sitting next to a lady on the plane. And 5 years later or 6 years later, I'm still struggling with the language, still trying to learn. And because I was on a Czech airline, I decided that I would do a bit of practice. So in the most basic way, I asked for a coffee in Czech. Much to the amusement of the lady sitting next to me, who said, "What? Why are you learning Czech?" So I said, "Oh, I can tell you the story." And I told her the story about how I met my girlfriend to be wife. That was very interesting. And that story still has a very strong connection to World War II, because when I met my then girlfriend, it was because I was staying, or I was looking for an Airbnb, which she happened to own, which is how we met, and I was on the way to through Czech Republic, and I wanted to visit the village of Lidice, which was the village that the Nazis decimated and killed everybody in its historical interest. So there was a connection there. So this lady who I was talking to, Petra, their name is, she said, "Oh, very, very interesting." She said, "Oh, you'll be interested in where I live in Czech." I said, "Oh, really?" So she said, "Yeah." She said, "I live on the other side of Czech, very close to Slovakia." She said, "But within walking distance of my home is what was Schindler's factory." And I went, "Wow, how fascinating is that?" And more or less would have been the end of the story, because I said, "What's the situation with it?" And she said, "It's boarded up." She said, "And it's fenced in. You can't go in it." She said, "It's dilapidated. There's been talk of plans that one day it may be a museum, but nothing's happened in 79 years, and there's nothing on the horizon." So it wasn't a place that would have immediately meant I would want to visit, because what could I see? Nothing. A building from the other side of a fence locked in. But then we got talking, and I explained that I had done a talk to some children in Czech about the differences between, not in Czech, sorry, in English, but to Czech children in our local village where we live. And I talked to them about the difference between West countries and Central Europe and differences between UK and Czech. And she said, "Wow," she said, "I'm a teacher." She said, "I teach English." And she said, "I have students who speak English very well. Would you consider maybe coming to my school and talking?" And I said, "Yeah, no problems at all. I'll do that." no problem at all. So when I arrived at my girlfriend's, I explained what had happened. She told us, yeah, it's a 2-hour drive, but as long as we get it organised, not a problem at all. I said, great, okay. So a few weeks later, that was organised, and I went to the school and did a talk to 2 different classes in the morning, and they had already told me that we would be hanging around for lunch, but the school was going to do something at lunch from there. And I said, great. So I said, fine. So I did that, and they said, right, now we've got a surprise for you. Oh, what's a surprise? Well, the surprise was that Petra had gone to the headmaster and said, listen, this guy that I met on the plane who's going to do the talk, he's actually really, really, really interested in Second World War. So he would have been really interested if we could get into the factory. To which the headmaster said, well, you're the person who should be organising that. Petra said, me? Why? And he said, well, a former pupil of yours, a friend of yours, he was a school friend of yours, now owns it. And he runs a business from part of it. So he's the guy to contact. So long story short, she had contacted him. He said, yeah, not a problem at all. And suddenly we had a personal tour. Absolutely fascinating. All from a conversation on the plane. But the story is much, much, much bigger than that. Because we got on really, really well with the owner. He was just a great guy. And I think he could genuinely see that I was just like blown away from walking around from a piece of history. This was Schindler's factory. Just fascinating. You saw where he and his wife lived, which was actually within the foundry, within the confines of the area, just close by. You were touching history. It was really interesting. The place is massively run down, leaking roof, blah, blah, blah. A year later, we get an invite. And the invite is they've now got some funds together and they are hopefully going to move forward and make, and this is about 5 years ago, by the way, so okay. So they're hopefully at that time, their hope was that they were going to move forward with the plan to make this into a museum in honour of Schindler, but also in honour of all the people who, some suffered there. I mean, he saved a lot of lives, as we know from Schindler's List, the film, but he could only save a certain number. He did as best he could. So we got an invite to this. And when we turned up, we didn't really know what to expect as such. And it was probably one of the most moving moments of my life, really, because what happened was there were a couple of people there a few people there who were actually survivors from that time, from Schindler had saved their lives. So that was memorable in itself. There was about 70 people, 70 guests, that's all. So it was a small number of people. And it was raining, and a big, huge, massive building, size of a football field, or maybe half the size of a football field. So the roof was leaking in different areas, and there was one part in the middle where the roof was reasonably okay, not too bad. It was a massive thunderstorm. And they had set up there a number of chairs, and we sat down, and they actually played the film Schindler's List in English, in his factory, in the middle of a storm. You couldn't write that. You couldn't get that. You couldn't organise it. You couldn't do anything. It really was genuinely an amazing moment to just, incredible, absolutely incredible. And there's a little bit that is extra to it, because very recently, we're now in 2025, by the way, if you're watching this podcast in years to come. So we're now in 2025. Very, very recently, they have just finished the restoration, and it's now open. And we are actually going to be going in a few weeks' time for the first time. But they sent us some photographs and a little video, promotional video. And you can't get any more moving than this. From the day that we were there to watch the film Schindler's List, there was a photographer there, and he took photographs of groups of people. And my wife and I were the two most unlikely people to be there. We had no real connection at all, apart from being fascinated and having visited before. But the invite came from the previous owner, remember? So that we had a very special invite, but no real connection. We were the only people there that didn't have a real connection to it, a direct connection. And amazingly, just by fluke, by coincidence, whatever, there is a group photograph of about 6 or 7 people who are listening to someone talking to us on that day when the film was made. And it is very clear a photograph includes myself and my wife. And it's actually on a poster, one of those big, large posters in Schindler's factory. Absolutely forever. Weird. Some things just happen in the most bizarre way. So, I mentioned before that I wrote a couple of books. And the first book I wrote, I sort of finished the book, or at one stage wrote in it that I had met a lot of my heroes in my life, footballers, TV personalities, musicians, people that had influenced my life. And I met a lot of them. Sadly, a couple of them had passed away before I got to my bucket list. I got my bucket list from about the age of 58. I decided that I wanted to meet people who had influenced my life in a good way and tell them how they had done it. They weren't all necessarily famous. One or two of them were. Emerson, Lake and Palmer. I didn't meet Emerson because he'd passed away, but Greg Lake and Carl Palmer I met from the famous group. And other people were famous, but then there were other people who were my ex-school teacher. He's not famous, but, there we go. I wanted to meet these people. And the ultimate to me, and I actually wrote it in my first book, saying that the ultimate dream for me would be to meet Lech Walesa. President Lech Walesa of Poland, a man who single-handedly, without raising a gun, without firing a bullet, his actions resulted in Europe changing. The end of the Soviet Union, the Berlin Wall coming down, East and West joining each other. And he did it in the most absolutely amazing way. I remember this guy when I was, 14 years of age to 20 years of age, let's say, so whenever that was in the 70s. And it was on the television all the time, that it was coming up in the 80s, and it was coming up on the TV all the time, what he was doing. And I used to sit there watching every day, realising that this guy on his own, well, not on his own, he had plenty of other people, but he was the voice of it, and he was doing these speeches. He was taking on Russia. It was obvious to me that one day soon, we were just going to get an announcement to say, Lech Walesa has been shot. He's missing. He's been assassinated. He's not going to survive this. That was in my head and in the head of everybody. He was public enemy number one to the Russians. He was trying to wreck the Soviet Union. That's not a popular thing to be doing. But he did it. And he became my lifetime hero, like he became a hero to 40 million Polish people and everybody else in ex-Soviet Union countries. One day this guy, he's still alive, by the way, and one day his funeral is going to happen, and you will all realise, if you haven't heard of his name before, you will all realise just what a huge achievement he accomplished. So he was my number one, absolute number one. Put it in my book. And then one time when I was over in Czech, we're about 600 miles away from where I assumed he still lived, which was Gdansk in northern Poland. And we live in Czech Republic about 600 miles south of there. So one day, I sent a book in the post. I found an address for Lech Walesa's office. ex-president of Poland, still had an office. So I sent my book and I highlighted the page and I wrote and said, you will see from my book, I didn't address it to him, I addressed it to his secretary. And I said, you will see from my book that I would very much like to meet him. Didn't get a reply, not a surprise. Sent several emails, didn't get any replies, and wasn't really surprised. One day, I remember every single detail about this. It was a Thursday. I was sitting with my wife in a lounge in the Czech Republic, and I said, I'm going to try a phone call, going to phone the office. To which she probably smiled and laughed and said, okay, idiot, get on with it. You know, you've tried sending him your book, you've sent him emails, it's not going to happen. He's the ex-president of Poland. Why is he going to meet you? And she would be not negative, like that sounded terribly negative. She was very supportive, but she was a realist as well, like everybody was. You know, I mentioned it to plenty of people and put it in my book, and they said, well, yeah, you know, great. Good on you, John. You want to meet Lech Walesa. That's probably not going to happen, mate, but, you know, there we go. You've got an ambition. So I pick up the phone, and whenever you speak to someone in a foreign language, we all do it, you keep sentences short. You don't want to complicate life like I normally do. So the phone is picked up in Polish. So I said, you speak English? Yes. Okay. And I kept it short like this, so please bear with me. I said, my name is John from England. I would like to meet Lech Walesa. Can I speak to his secretary, please? One moment. I got put through to the secretary. This was a big moment. I thought, wow, that I'm at least going to get an answer now. I'm going to get like no, but at least I'm going to know that the person has spoken to. Okay. So a man voice, not a surprise, could have been a girl, could have been a man. It was a man. It was a man phoned up, picked up the phone, and said, hello, Lech Walesa, President Walensa's secretary, can I help you? And I said, yeah. I said, my name is John from England. And I've written a book, and I said my life's ambition would be to meet the president, and I've sent several emails, to which he then cut the conversation and said, yeah, I know who you are. Okay, so that amused me for a start off, because he was literally like, "You're a stalker. We can't get rid of you. We're not replying to you, but here you are now phoning." You know. So he said, "Okay, go on." So I said, "I'd like to meet him." So he said, "Okay, right. I'm sorry we haven't replied, but okay. Now you're on the phone. He's actually in hospital at the moment." And he's having some tests tomorrow. But when I speak to him tomorrow, I will ask him and I will come back to you. And I said, okay, it was a Thursday. Okay. So we get a phone call on the Monday. And on the Monday, the phone call is, spoken to him and he's willing to meet you. And I remember every single part, I remember where we were sitting. I remember everything about this, okay? So he said, are you able to come now? And he said, where are you now? And I said, well, we're close to Prague. We're 600 miles away. He said, oh, right, okay. He said, well, he would have had time today. I can't say that he will have time tomorrow, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And I said, not a problem. I said, we're leaving now. I said, we will be there this evening. And I said, so we'll get there this evening, stay overnight, and we'll stay however long. We'll stay a week if necessary. And I will phone you and we will see if it can be arranged tomorrow, day after, whenever. He said, okay, I can't make promises. I said, I know you can't make promises, but if I was there now, I would get to meet him. He said, yes, he's got availability today, and I've explained to him and he's willing for you to meet him. Okay, fine. Great. So we drive up to Gdansk, we book into a hotel, and the following morning, I'm too excited, can't be bothered making phone calls. That seemed absolutely crazy, stupid waste of time. So I just drove straight to his office, or we drove straight to his office, 9 o'clock, walked into the office, got to the door, pressed the bell, lady came to the door, can I speak to the president's secretary? No, she said, I'm sorry. She said, he's not here. So I said, ooh, right, okay. I said, when she said, he'll be here in about an hour from now, about 10 o'clock, come back then. So I said, okay, fine. So I said, my name is John. And she said, yes. She said, we know. So she knew, which was really, really helpful. So I actually said then, out of interest, is the president here today? And she said, yeah. She said, he's here now. So I said, wow, okay. So I had an hour now of being the most overexcited, ridiculously overexcited person. We went to the square, which was quite close by, to have a coffee. I think my wife thought she just needed to get me to sit down and calm down. And there were hundreds of people in this big square. And how I managed to not stand there and shout to all of them, I am about to meet your president, Lech Walesa. I have no idea, because that's what I wanted to do, but I probably thought to myself, it's not a really good idea to be doing that. That could actually prevent me from meeting him. Anyway, long story short, we get back at 10 o'clock, 1 hour later, secretary comes to meet me. He's great. He's full of smiles. He could see my enthusiasm. There's childlike adults, can't wait to meet this guy, and the rest is history. We got taken through to his office. I've met the Queen twice through charity work, and on both occasions that sort of happened in a bit of a blur. Only once did I actually have much of a conversation with her. The second time, she was talking to other people, but I spoke to Prince Philip at length there. But I have no memory of that. You can't sort of take a mobile phone and you can't turn around and say to the Queen, hey, can we have a selfie or whatever? It doesn't even go through your head. But what happened with Lech Walesa, which was just brilliant, I didn't think about it. I had my mobile phone, but I wouldn't have dreamt of saying, can I have a photograph with you or anything like that. But what actually happened was his secretary had worked out that I was, a very excited boy here. So a photograph should really be taken. So we organised it, and he said, right, we're going to take a photograph now. So my wife on one side of Lech, me on the other side. And he took a photograph with his mobile phone and then said, have you got your phone with you? And then took a photograph. And he then gave us a book and a card, which had both been signed by Lech. Just great. What a wonderful set of circumstances that was. So again, I'm going to say that the whole thing trips because it still emulates from the opportunity of writing the book, which came from the opportunities of doing the solo bike ride. So I still maintain that one thing followed from another. So the last story I want to share with you, and this will be the end, as I say, this is the 10th episode and the last episode of what I've done on my solo trips. The future podcasts I will do will be more to do with what my wife and I have been doing, different things to do with Manor Park classics, particularly about riding and being enthusiastic about classic motorcycles. So that'll be more to do with bikes. This was just to hopefully inspire someone out there. So one trip, Ukraine. I'm in Ukraine, and I wanted to go to Chernobyl. I wanted to visit Chernobyl because Chernobyl had just been opened. Now, I can tell you quite a few numbers here. Chernobyl had been closed until 2014, and it was then opened. It was deemed as being relatively safe for a controlled number of visitors. In the first year, that number was 10,000. There were mostly relatives. There were mostly people who formerly lived there, who hadn't seen their homes since the disaster and wanted to go back to see, to remind themselves. Following year, only about... and the other people that went there were scientists, and everybody from all over the world came in that first 10,000 when it was opened in 2014. I think I must have been there around about 2017 or 18. Yeah, I'm looking at my wife for reassurance there. Yeah, so 4 years later. Of course, a year later, COVID kicked in. And then the Russians came in, and they disturbed Chernobyl yet again. And it is now probably extremely unlikely they will open it for another 30, 40, 50 years. Because the numbers of people had already dropped. It went from 10,000, it went down to 2,500, it went down to 1,000 people. The people who were going to be interested, which was the scientists and relatives and so on, those numbers finished. They came to an end. So these tourist visitors that had been organised where you could go was for an incredibly short window. And I feel so incredibly fortunate to have been one of those people. And in particular, the people I was with. I was riveted with it, was absolutely fascinated. In a lot of the Central and Eastern European countries, they, in the past, and to an extent it occasionally happens now, but communism threw up some good things and threw up some bad things. Well, one of the good things that communism did was it looked after its own people. So you would find, for example, and I can give you this as an example because it was absolutely true, the very first time I went to Moscow, which was in 1980-something, I wanted to go to the Bolshoi Ballet, as everybody would, because it's the ultimate place to go in Moscow. And they only have a very, very, very small number of tickets for tourists. And they're expensive, and they are few. All of the other tickets are very cheap, and they are for Russian people. And you're on a list, and when your name comes up, that's it. And you can't sell the ticket black market. You have to be there, and they will randomly check. And if you didn't use your ticket and you sold it, you would be in serious trouble over there. So what I'm saying by that is that they looked after the locals. So when I got on the minibus, which took us from Kiev out to Chernobyl, there was 15 of us on board, and the tourist guide announced in Ukraine, welcome, and then she then said in different languages, is anyone from Germany, is anyone from France, is anyone from England? I put my hand up. So I was the only English person on board. All of the others Ukraine. So one of the things that they asked me was, one of the Ukrainians said, how much did it cost for my day trip? And including everything, it was 70 euros, let's say, something like that, which included the minibus to Chernobyl, which is about an hour and a half, and then the tour around, and then back there. And I said, why'd you ask? And he said, oh, because for Ukrainians, it's different. He said, we've only paid the equivalent of 10 euros. So I said, oh, wow. And he said, but you should ask the question, how much a Russian would pay for this tour? So I said, well, I wouldn't have thought many Russians would want to come because they were mostly responsible for the disaster. And he said, yeah, absolutely. And he said, it would be hundreds of euros. And I said, why is that? And he said, because they would have to come on their own. He said they would not be welcome in a minibus like this. So that's very interesting, blah, blah, blah. So it would have been, when I say they would have to come on their own, they would have to come on an organised trip by themselves. So they'd be in a minibus sitting there on their own. So the tour was just so interesting. It is going to be 20,000 years before it is safe for any humans to return. The place has been left exactly as it was. Clothes, everything, even dinner plates set up, everything. You walk around the different apartments. It's a ghost town. It's totally incredible. If you haven't watched the television documentary series, you should do, because this was so close to an absolute world disaster. And one of the reasons why I was particularly interested in Chernobyl was when the disaster happened and the reactor went on fire. First, the Russians shut down the story and said, no, nothing's happened. And the first people who became aware of it was Sweden. And in Sweden, they picked up uranium and a record of what was happening in the atmosphere, radiation. And at first, that was passed back to the president, I think, or the prime minister, I'm not sure. Prime minister, I think it is, of Sweden. And they said, listen, we're picking up an awful lot of radiation and we've got a problem. And he said, well, where is this happening? And they've explained where in Sweden it was happening. And he said, what have we got? What type of reactors have we got there? And they said, we haven't got any reactors over there at all. That we don't know where this has come from. And it transpired that it dropped in that area because it was up in the jet streams from Chernobyl. Rain came along, sent it down. Now, this also happened in North Wales. That was the next place, which is where I live and where I'm from. And still to this day, there are fields where no animals can graze. The radiation is still so high. And a lot of animals in North Wales had to be put down. So it had an effect in those two areas. Thankfully, it seems that it only affected animals. I'm not saying that's a good thing, but it didn't affect humans. It wasn't a high enough radiation. But nevertheless, it proved how close it was to an absolute world disaster. So one of the most moving days of my life, because I was sitting on a minibus with 14 other people who were all Ukrainians, who all had a direct connection to Chernobyl. I think there was 2 that actually lived there when they were very young, so they didn't really have much of a memory. And all of the others had relatives that had lived there and had died. And all the statistics that come out, I won't bore you with all of this, but you need to watch the documentary series. But what the Russians initially said, that Chernobyl had been responsible for killing, I think they actually turned around and said it was something like 60 people, and it was more like 100,000 people. All the statistics around it, how they cleared the place, how they got so many people out of there so quickly, too late, I might add, but nevertheless, and how they did the operation, and how they promised them that they were coming back in 2 days from now. So they just brought 2 days' clothes, a bit of food to last you 1 day. We're going to just clean the atmosphere for you. It's amazing that everybody didn't just stop and say, what do you mean you're going to clean the atmosphere? You can't clean the air. So there we go. It was just a moving day, and again coincidence, and again one of those issues where I look back and I think to myself, talk about being in the right place at the right time. The window of opportunity to be in Chernobyl was so small. It was 2014 to 2018, and in 2014 and 2015, 2016, you couldn't get a ticket. They were sold out. There was a maximum number of people that could go in those years. So really the window became maybe 1 year. Maybe I just had that tiny little opportunity to visit, something that will live with me for the rest of my life. So there we go. Told you a few stories of coincidences. I don't know if they are coincidences or whether I just made sure that I was in the right place for the possibility. I probably got 100 stories of trying to make something happen that didn't work, but hey, that's life. If you're in business, if you're in sales, if you're in anything where you're on a numbers game, that's life. You've got to talk to 20 people to get 2 customers. You've got to talk to 10 situations to sell a car or whatever it may be. And in my experience with all these solo motorbike trips, I've probably been in dozens and dozens and dozens of situations which I no longer remember, where I was hoping that maybe if this happens, then that might happen, and blah, 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 blah. And it didn't happen, and that's why I don't remember. So I'm just conversing to you the ones where it did happen and the how it happened. But again, is it coincidence? No. It's being in that position and opening your mouth, smiling. I always say that's the most important language that you can ever use. The three things that I live by, which is travelling on my own, travelling on a motorbike, and being of this age. Those three things work. But without the fourth, you got no chance whatsoever. Nobody's going to talk to you. You got to smile. A smile and laughter are the two universal things. From Liverpool, everybody from Liverpool will tell you that, we've got the best sense of humour in the world, blah, 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 blah. The sense of humour is everywhere in the world. I have riotous laughter with Czechs that don't understand English, and I don't understand enough Czech, but they can make me laugh just as much as anyone from Liverpool or anyone from anywhere else. It's a universal thing. Human beings, we like to smile. We like to laugh. The world is full of miserable people. It really is. They support different football teams than me anyway. Evertonian before you start saying. So there you go. The universal, the smile, it works. The motorbike, it works. And solo travelling, I suppose, if you were on a bicycle or if you were by foot, you're on your own. People are going to be attracted to you. People are going to talk to you and wonder what your story is. And then go and write a book. Go and tell people about it. Go and inspire. I've been inspired. That's why I've done what I've done. It's through a series of people throughout my life that have inspired me and given me the confidence to not feel a fool in situations, because that's what happens. You don't always land on your feet. Sometimes you land on your bum and you're in a predicament and you think to yourself, I took a risk and, well, this has all gone horribly wrong for me. And can I blame anybody? No, I've taken the risk. I'm on my own. What the hell am I doing in the middle of Armenia? With no breakdown insurance, and no nothing like that. This was going to happen. But you get on with it and you move on with it, and somewhere along the line, because you smile, because you're polite, someone will come along and help, just like you would help them in the same situation. There you go. Hopefully one of these podcasts has clicked with you. Something's happened. Something I've said has inspired you, reminded you. Massive believer that if you get to an age and a stage in your life where you can look back and you can think back to the people who've inspired you, whether it was a school teacher, a sports club, whatever it was, somebody in your youth or in your early 20s who really inspired you, a former boss, that's always got to be a good one. You've had a good boss at one stage, because you've had plenty of bad bosses, but you had one who was really good. Go and look them up. Go and shock the hell out of them and go and find them. It's easy to find people now because of Facebook and Google and all the rest of it. It's dead easy to find people. Go and find them and just sit there and say, you impacted my life. You inspired me. I remember you did this. Thank you. They haven't got a clue. They have no idea at all that they've had any impact whatsoever. They might not even remember you. If they do remember you, they will not have any idea that they inspired you in some way and that you remember and you've done something with that inspiration. Go and find them and say thank you, because it's the greatest feeling in the world to actually pass on thank yous to people who've had that type of impact on your life and personality. Go and do it. There you go. Thank you for listening.